Welcome back, everyone. It's Jennifer McGuire. I am taking a quick break from my favorite crafty things series to bring you a card video because I was just itching to make a card. I have a very short and simple video for you today that involves stencil masking. Now, this technique is a fun one if you still want a one-layer card but want a little bit of texture. And I'll be using some fun products from Sweet Stamp Shop. I like their images. They're cute and they're little and they're perfect for simple and quick cards. So I did a little planning before I started the video. I planned onto a little circle all the stamping that I wanted to do. So I knew how much room I needed. And I cut that to a circle with a die cut, or with a die, I'm sorry. And I'm going to trace this with a pencil onto the background so I know where I need to do my stamping. I am stamping my image with my favorite things, black hybrid ink, because this is great for Copic markers. Now notice I'm not inking up the entire stamp. I'm only inking up the two cheeses on this image, and I'm not inking the third cheese that's sitting on top of the big one, because I want to have the mouse sitting there instead. This is a trick I use often where I only partially ink up a stamp. If you need to, you could create a mask for that stamp, or the portion of it that you don't want to ink up, but here I was just able to kind of ink around it. You'll see it's not perfect, but we'll fix that in a moment. Now I'm going to stamp the little mouse on top, and now it's time to kind of finish out the areas I didn't ink well. And so I'm just using my Copic multi-liner. This is the 0.3 marker. And this is a great black pen for tracing over your images to make them more solid and for filling in any areas where you didn't stamp completely. I also decided to do a little curly Q-tail onto the little mouse there, and also add some little lines into his ears because I want to add some pink there. Now the greeting here is "Have a Gouda day," which I just think is adorable, and I'm going to stamp this with my black Hero Arts dye ink because this is my favorite ink for a crisp black image. So I use the other ink because the Copic markers will be touching that. So let's go ahead and start our coloring. I use Copics because I'm quick with those. I use them in a very simple way, but you could use any coloring you would like. I started with the mouse with a light gray, C1, and then I added in a bit of shading with C3, but you could use any grays for this. Then I decided to put some pink highlights with R20. That's my favorite kind of blush color. I just went right over the gray, and that just blends on its own. It doesn't take much effort at all. Then I always finish with my darkest color, C3, to add some shadows. Now for the cheese, I actually used one color. I used YR21, and I added that around the edges. Then I came in with my colorless blender and blended that out to white so that most of the cheese is white with a little bit of yellow. Then again, I came in with that yellow, the darker color, and added some depth to it. For the outside of the cheese, I decided to go with a pop of color, so I'm going in with some red coloring, and I start with R22, then I switch to R24, back to R22, and then I always finish with that darkest R24 for the darkest areas. So there we go, quick and easy coloring. We can go ahead and erase our circle except for a little bit there on the right. I'm keeping a little bit along the edge so I know where to line up my stencil in a moment. Okay, so now it's time to add this textured background, and I'm going to do that with a stencil and texture paste and embossing powder. But it's very easy. Now I'm going to use this practice circle as a mask. So I'm just putting down a little bit of temporary adhesive. I'm lining it up with those pencil marks that I still have just a little bit of over there on the right. And this is just protecting my coloring underneath so we can put texture paste over the rest of the card. So I'm actually going to flip this over and tape it to the back of my stencil. This was just easier than trying to do this from the other side because the stencil is bigger than the paper. I'm using a bit of micropore tape, but any kind of tape you want to use would work here. Washi tape, masking tape, painter's tape, anything. Just taping it there so it doesn't shift. Now I'm using texture paste here. I just love this product. I have a palette knife. You just take a little bit out and start spreading it on. I just can't get enough of this new stencil from Simon Says Stamp called Tiny Dots. I just love the tiny bit of texture that it puts on the background of your card. So after I've put an even layer of this texture paste over it, I don't have to worry because that little stamped area underneath the circle is protected by that circle we temporarily placed there. So that's kind of masking our stamped area. Now with texture paste, you always want to close it up quickly and then wash your stencil off right away so that it doesn't dry on there. So I'm carefully peeling my stencil off here first. Once I have that off, I'll be able to go ahead and remove the circle mask that we have on there, and I'll be able to pitch that. Right now I have some fun tone-on-tone, white-on-white dots on the background, but I wanted to add some sparkle to that. So while this paste is still wet, I'm going to go ahead and add an iridescent clear embossing powder. This will just give some sparkle to it. So the wet paste is holding onto the powder. You could use any embossing powder you want here. Now I set this aside with the embossing powder on it I set it aside for about 15 minutes so that the paste could dry. Then I brought a heat gun to it to heat set the embossing powder. Now the reason I let the texture paste dry first is if you bring a heat gun to the wet texture paste, sometimes it causes it to bubble, which is a cool effect, but I didn't really want that. I wanted some nice perfect dots in the background. So after I gave about 15 minutes for the paste to dry, I come back with a heat gun to heat set and melt all that embossing powder that's on top of the texture paste. So basically what I end up with is lots of texture. I wish the camera captured it, but there's lots of sparkle on there too. Really something fun to do. You keep a one layer look here, just a little bit of texture added, but you were able to mask around an area where you did some stamping and coloring. Now whenever I put texture paste on a card, once it's dry, I use a sanding block to kind of sand off any bit of that texture paste that kind of is hanging off the edge. Just gives it a nice finished look. I created a top folding card from some steel gray My Favorite Things cardstock, and I'll just add my stamped panel with some foam tape. So there you have it, a very easy and quick technique where you take a circle mask to kind of protect a stamped area and then put some texture paste over a stencil. If you are interested in these products, I link to them below in my YouTube description, or you could head over to my blog where I'll have more information, and you can see my guest post over at Sweet Stamp Shop. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I'll see you again soon for my favorite crafty things.